Okay, classification of life and phylogenetic trees. So the characteristics of life. This is everything that has life can be characterized by these three things. They have some sort of order. There's some sort of regulation or homeostasis. Um, Energy processing. They have some sort of metabolism. They go through evolutionary adaptation, meaning that they can evolve, change their allele frequencies. They respond to their environment, they reproduce, and they grow and have some sort of development over time. There's three main domains of life: the bacteria, the archaea, and the eukarya, right? And the last common ancestor would be way down here, right? Remember, both our bacteria and archaea contain prokaryotic organisms, whereas the eukarya have cells that are larger, that have bigger genomes, linear chromosomes, and most importantly, membrane-bound organelles. So remember, so here's a good little chart to look at the different characteristics and the domains. A couple of the interesting ones, for example, let me look. Okay, so peptidoglycans are only present in bacteria. Introns are present in archaea and eukarya. And histones are present in archaea and eukarya, but not bacteria. Remember also that the archaea are often considered the extremophiles, but bacteria and archaea are the prokaryotes, and the eukarya are obviously eukaryotic cells. But archaea has a lot of similarities with the eukaryotic cells as well. So methods of classification, there's many different methods that you can use to categorize organisms based on their evolutionary history or their phylogeny. Morphologically, biochemical characteristics, fossils, life cycles, embryology. What we're doing more and more in the scientific community now are using DNA and protein sequencing for this. And remember that we are a tiny blip on the evolutionary history of Earth. Humans are a very, very small sliver. There were very, very successful organisms, such as the dinosaurs and other things previously. So the biological classification, remember, King Philip came over for good soup, but you know what he actually came over for. This is kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Came over for good soup. Binomial nomenclature was done by Linnaeus. He was the first one that kind of figured out that a good way of naming all of the organisms on life is using this genus species indicator. And he also determined kind of hierarchical, I hate that word, hierarchical classifications, starting with species being the most specific and then going up from there. Skip that. So phylogenetic trees, remember every time you see a branching event, that is a speciation event. And you can go back and look at the little video about speciation if you want to know more about those. But that can happen within a different, due to geographical changes or within a single environment. And that can happen quickly over time or fast. And due to many or very small changes in the genome. And the two types are, again, allopatric speciation, meaning in different geographies, or sympatric speciation happening within one environment. So phylogenetic trees are useful for looking at a common descent. And remember, there are the beefy ham evidence for evolution. You can go back and look at those. The length of the length of the tree branches does not indicate length of time or the amount of change. Rather, it's just a speciation event. So homologous structures, again, are similarity due to ancestry. This is divergent evolution. So they diverged away from each other, but they have a common ancestor. Whereas analogous structures are due to come from convergent evolution, where they do not have a common ancestor, but they both have the evolution of a common trait due to similar environmental pressures. So if you look at a phylogenetic tree, you should know the root, you should know that each point on the graph represents the most recent common ancestor for everything above it. So for example, this point, the most recent common ancestor between A and B. However, they are different species now due to genetic changes over time. Remember that the root always represents the ancestors, the farthest out represents the present day species. All of these trees show the exact same relationships. They can be drawn in different ways. Ancestral traits are things that modern organisms and ancestral organisms have. So modern organisms and ancestral organisms both have it. This is kind of like the older model, right? Derived features, our current organisms have this feature, but ancestral organisms don't have this trait. This is kind of the new and improved model, right? So phylogenetic tree, there's lots of practice that I have provided here that you should definitely check out. I don't think that I'm going to have you draw a phylogenetic tree on my cumulative, but it might be on the AP test, so you should be able to look at this. But even if you're not drawing the tree, you should be able to interpret tables like this. So what this is saying is we're looking at different features and whether these organisms have them or not. So lampreys are obviously the most ancestral because they don't have any of these traits. Sea bass are the next because they only have one of those traits, and so on. All right, and so you should be able to look at phylogenetic trees like this and say, okay, so which organisms are the most closely related, right? And we would say probably bald eagles and alligators are the most closely related here. And which organisms have lungs? So everything beyond this point has lungs. All right, and you can also do this by looking at tables, looking at DNA data. So what this is showing is that you have species A through F and species A through F. So what it says is species A compared to B has 27 different DNA changes in the DNA, right? Otherwise, they're identical except for 27. So which of these species are the most closely related? So we're going to go and look at the smallest number. So species E and species F only have one DNA difference, right? So those are the most closely related. Species D and C only have 3 DNA changes in the DNA. So those are the next most closely related. The ones that are most farthest apart, we're looking at the biggest number, that would be species A and F. Okay, and this kind of walks you through how to do this. Here's one other example. And again, it's looking at different organisms here, and it's asking whether they can fly, whether they have sucking mouth parts, etc. So silverfish cannot fly, but all of these other organisms can, right? So what is probably the most ancestral here? What is the most ancestral organism? That would be the silverfish, because it doesn't have any of these features, right? Whereas moths and butterflies have all of those features. And here is the phylogenetic tree for that.